Okay, welcome everyone. I'm going to have to make a very quick apology. Obviously, we're all working at home at the moment, and my neighbours have decided to take this moment to do some axle grinding in the back garden. I'm hugely sorry. I hope it doesn't disturb. I will be silent after I've done a quick introduction. I'd like to welcome everyone to our first Tibet climate crisis talk. We will be running these talks hopefully at least every month for the next couple of months as we move forward with this campaign. I am hugely delighted to invite our guests today, one of whom is a very close colleague of mine at Tibet Network, Tempa Gyaltsen, also from Central Tibetan Administration, and Gloria from Tibet Advocacy Coalition. I just wanted to start talking about the fact that we are using Zoom. We've had a number of people have raised concern about our use of Zoom for this broadcast. I just want to clarify that we are hugely aware of the security risks surrounding the use of Zoom at the moment. Tibet Network has been using Zoom as a communications platform for a number of years now, very successfully. But we have taken the concerns very seriously and have made a decision that we will not be using the platform for any internal communications anymore. However, for public material and public broadcasts, we will still be using it because all of the information we're sharing is publicly available. So until we find another platform that can produce public broadcast as well as this, then we will continue to do this via Zoom. So all of that said, I would like to hand over to our moderator for today, who will guide us through the discussion. So over to you, Gloria.
Thanks, Mandy. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Gloria Montgomery, and as Mandy mentioned, I work with the Tibet Advocacy Coalition, and I will be the moderator for today's session. So let me first start by thanking Mandy and ITN for organising this Tibet climate crisis talk, and for Tempa, Gyaltsen and Lobsang, Yangtso for joining us to participate in today's discussion. So just as a way of a bit of an introduction to the panelists, so Tempa Gyaltsen is the executive head from the Environment and Development Desk of the Tibet Policy Institute at the Tibetan Central Administration. And his research has focused on the social economic impacts of climate change on the Tibetan plateau and the increasing cases of natural disasters and garbage littering that are occurring in Tibet, as well as the cases and increased cases of mining across Tibet. While Lobsang Yangtso is the environment researcher and coordinator for the International Tibet Network, and her research focuses on China's government's environmental policies and economic development in Tibet. So just as a little bit of a run through for what we can expect from today's session. So today's session will really be about highlighting the increased cases of natural disasters that are taking place in Tibet, looking at why they've been exacerbated and understanding the impact that these do have on Tibetans. It really cannot be stressed enough just how crucial it is for Tibet to be raised in these global climate crisis discussions and to be incorporated into any solution on climate change. So with that being said, and also being conscious of time, I'd like to sort of just jump right in and kickstart those discussions and turn to Tempa and ask whether you can shed some light and explain a little bit about what kind of natural disasters we are currently witnessing inside Tibet.
Thank you very much, Gloria, and also thank you very much, International Tibet Network, for organizing this platform. I think it's very important at this point of time, and where we can reach to a large group of people. And also issue that we are going to discuss is very important and very relevant, and particularly cases of natural disasters. Now, natural disasters in Tibet has been particularly serious since 2016. And that is when I wrote an article titled, Natural Disasters in Tibet, Is It the New Normal? So at that point of time, I was really worried. Was it an isolated case? Or is this a new trend, a new climatic trend that is emerging on the Tibet plateau? So most of the natural disasters that we have seen in Tibet since 2016 were floods, landslides, and glacier avalanche, and of course in recent years, forest fire. So these are the issues. And in 2016, we saw 5 natural disasters in different parts of Tibet within 2 months, that's July and August. And in 2017, there were 6 other cases within 3 months of June, July, and August. And that continued all the way into 2018, and when there were 5 natural disasters just in 1 month alone. And all the natural disasters were shifting from one region to another. So in 2016, it was primarily in Amdo region, that is northeastern region of Tibet. And in 2017, it was particularly to the Kham region or southeastern region of Tibet. And in 2019, it went all the way into the center of Tibet. And now in recent months, from between February and April, we had seen forest fires. So the situation in Tibet regarding natural disaster has been unprecedented and extreme. And this is what the situation is like in Tibet.
And Lobsang, do you have anything to add on that?
Oh yeah, thank you, Gloria. Yeah, so as Tempa was talking about the increasing natural disasters that we see in Tibet, but I think when we look at the natural disasters, it's also very important that why we see more of a natural disasters recent years. So before I comment anything on this topic, I would like to say that first I would like to say that to our viewers that Tibet is a illegal occupied country by the Chinese government, and it is an occupied nation. So it is very important to keep that in mind when we discuss what is exactly happening in Tibet. So when we know that, then we get kind of some understanding why the Chinese government is behaving like that, and why we don't see any representation of Tibetans in decision making and in other various issues, and why media, why it's very difficult for us to really understand or know what is exactly happening. So when we have such kind of understanding, and when we know that Tibet is occupied, and China has Tibet. China has also like illegally occupied. And
I think Lobsang's actually just dropped off there. I mean, I think that I'll wait for her to rejoin, but I think that it's. Hi, Lobsang. Sorry, I think you dropped off there.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I think my internet is also quite.
All these problems working from home.
So I think that yeah. So that's So this is what I would like to say at this point.
I mean, I think that's really interesting, especially because it is something that's happening on such a wide scale now in Tibet. And yet it's still an issue that isn't really properly being discussed in mainstream climate discussions, which is a huge injustice to the situation. But, building on that, I wonder if either or both of you could tell us a little bit about what the primary causes are of those increasing disasters in Tibet. So we see that they're happening, but why are they happening?
if I could go first, and this is one issue that, as a researcher myself, we really want to understand, and because we know natural disasters because of climate change is a fact, is an issue that globally faces. We face it globally, and now we want to understand why it's happening in Tibet in recent years, much more in a much more severe sense. So, from my research, I think I found that climate change is, of course, the primary cause. No doubt about that, because what we have noticed that Tibet has experienced higher temperature rise and also increased precipitation or rainfall in recent years. Of course, this is not new, but it has been, Tibet has seen consecutive temperature rise since 1960s, and also increased rainfall since 1960s. But the drastic shift has been noticed in recent years, particularly since 2016. So the climate change and induced rainfall, increased rainfall and temperature rise is the primary cause. And also there are other factors, which if I could go quickly, is rapid urbanization and resource extraction. And this is important, as Dr. Lobsang Yangtso rightly said in her initial speech, that Chinese occupation is one of the causes here. And that is rapid urbanization and resource extraction. That's very rich in mineral resources, and China has started resource extraction in a large scale. So this is the second factor. And the third factor is, of course, the poor construction of homes in Tibet. That is to say that traditional way of building homes, because Tibet received very little rainfall in the past. So we have built our homes in such a way that to withstand cold climate condition and to receive maximum sunlight. But in recent years, the climate condition has suddenly changed. Now we are receiving increased rainfall, and also there's a rise in temperature. So how we have built homes and the material that we used are no longer able to face the new situation. And number 4 is, of course, the location or the topography of where the villages, towns, and cities are located. So if anyone who has been to Tibet, clearly can understand that most of the Tibetan towns and cities and villages are located either on a bank of river, or in a narrow valley, or on a slope, steep slope. So which were in the past the best way to be located. But in recent years, because of increased rainfall, unstable landscape has again put great risk because of landslide, floods. And then, of course, the final part is lack of awareness. And this is something that, again, goes back to what Lobsang also said, is Chinese occupation. At this point of time, Tibet is under Chinese occupation, and China as a governing state in Tibet at the moment, they have the responsibility to make the Chinese government officials and the Tibetan public aware of what climate change is and its possible implications and impacts. And that is not done. And that's why every time there is a natural disaster, the local government or the public are not prepared. So this is what's happening in Tibet.
And is that something that you found in your research as well, Lobsang?
Yeah, so I think when I would like to emphasize a bit more on, like, I think 3 points over here. So when Tempa talked about urbanization, and over here it's more about economic development. And it is very important to understand why China is focusing too much on economic development, and why economic development, the massive economic development, is also another cause for the natural disaster in Tibet. Whereas so Tibet being an illegal occupied by the Chinese government. So to the Chinese government to gain loyalty from the Tibetan people and then to establish peace and stability in the region is very important for them. So for them, to the Chinese government, economic development is the final solution to bring peace and stability in the region. So thus we see that due to massive economic development in the Tibetan area, and unnecessary, that also caused negative impact on people as well as on the environment. And so when we talk about economic development, so I would focus when it comes to the natural disaster. Mining and damming has been a major factor for the natural disaster. In 2018 in Dichu, Yangtso River, we have seen large number of landslides and huge flooding, and which has affected over 30 Tibetans and almost in 15 counties in so-called Tibet Autonomous Region and Sichuan provinces. So this is also clearly shows of a massive or excessive mining and development, and hydropower dams built on the Dichu Yangtze River, whereas right now there are like almost 25 dams and 20 hydropower stations built on the Yangtze River. So that clearly shows that, you know, economic development is causing a natural disaster in Tibet. And the second, I think it is also very important to see the nature of Tibetan Plateau as it is. Like Tibetan Plateau is a very fragile landscape and very fragile plateau, and it has prone to earthquake, and it has also very situated on a very systematic active plateau. So that means that when we have excessive economic development on the region, then that can cause and damage to the land and people as well.
Yeah, I think you've both very nicely touched on some of those primary causes, including, you know, rapid urbanization, including the increased economic development and resource extraction. And it's quite clear that they're some of the driving forces. But what about, you know, other factors that are exacerbating natural disasters in Tibet? And, you know, on top of that, what impact do those natural disasters have on the people that are living there?
Of course, there are many other factors that is causing natural disaster in Tibet, but we could categorize most of it into five factors, as I mentioned earlier. Now, what are the possible implications? The implications are very serious in Tibet because people are not prepared, and the government is not providing necessary technical assistance and also infrastructure to deal with the natural disasters. So people are not prepared, people are not aware of it, and a lot of times government officials and the general public think that any natural disasters in any particular place is an isolated case, and that won't happen to their places. But as a researcher myself, what we have seen that it's happening across Tibet. So it's a new climatic condition that is happening on the Tibet plateau. So we can see a new climatic reality is emerging on the plateau. So accordingly, every one of us in Tibet has to be prepared. And for that, the Chinese government has to provide necessary information, necessary technical assistance, and also start building certain infrastructure, such as river embankment, and also the weather-focused systems. So such things need to be done, but that is not done on the plateau. So what has happened is, even a small natural disaster can have a massive impact. Why? Because people are not prepared, government is not prepared. I can give you one example, as Lobsang also mentioned in her statement, that the Bolo landslide, which blocked Yangtze River, the world's third longest river, for almost 12 days. And also there was a flood in Zamlha, in east part of Tibet, which caused floods up through within the town itself. And so every time such things happen, if you compare the natural disaster in Tibet to other parts of the region, the magnitude is not serious. But then if you compare to Tibet itself, it's a serious issue because people are not prepared, and because of the landscape. For example, places like Dege and Rungta in East Tibet, which are located on a very narrow valley with a large river flowing through. So every time there is an increased rainfall or somewhere Indian monsoon reaching all the way into Tibet, this river suddenly surges and causes floods. So the implication is serious. And also, Tibetan homes are built by mud walls, many parts of Tibet, that we understand. And many homes are have flat roofs, open roofs, which means if there's a heavy rainfall, the rain could come into the homes. And also there has been cases of Tibetan nomads pasture land being flooded. So these issues, implications are very, very serious in Tibet because we are not prepared and because the Chinese government has not provided necessary assistance.
Lobsang, is there anything that Tempa said in specific that you might want to add to or expand on?
Oh yeah, so it's also very interesting to see how Chinese government respond to the natural disasters that we see in Tibet. But right now what we see is that recently in April 14th of 2020, the Chinese government did raise the Yushu earthquake that happened in 2010. And in this news, what the Chinese government talked about is they talked about how Yushu has improved after the earthquake and how much economic development that they have brought. So over here, it is very interesting to see because it basically shows how the Communist Party is using natural disasters to promote their own party, saying that we have brought so much economic development in Yushu and people are living a better life. We have brought decent roads or airports or Kesa Square. So if, but Yushu earthquake happened in 2010, and if the Chinese government really cares about economic development, this earthquake shouldn't have happened, and this economic development should have happened before 2010. And now, after a Yushu earthquake, so there is so much of promotion of saying that how Yushu has successfully improved. So that kind of, so it's very sad to see that how the government is trying to use these national disasters and to promote the Chinese government propaganda. And then over that, I mean, it is also important to see that and how the Chinese government respond. Whereas they say that we have established monitoring systems, surveillance systems with drones, satellites, or ground detectors. But with these coming years, we have seen more and more national disasters in Tibet. So it's very important to see why there are more of national disasters. And in that case, and what happens when people talk about that, and do the Tibetans have really enough space to talk about or to tell the world what is actually happening inside? So in that case, we have seen lots of environmental protests, and how the Chinese government have dealt with the environmental protests clearly shows that they are not given much emphasis on the environment conservation in Tibet.
I think you've both done a really good job in highlighting not only how extensive the climate crisis is inside Tibet, but also shedding some much needed light on, the underlying causes, the impacts that it's having on Tibetans, and also, most importantly, China's occupation and exploitation of Tibet. So let's move to discussing a little bit about solutions. What solutions are there to reduce these natural disasters from happening?
So can I say something before we could jump into the next session?
Please do, yeah.
Gloria. Now, this is something Dr. Lobsang has brought up some very interesting point here. That is the environmental protests in Tibet and how Chinese government suppressed them.
Yeah.
And this is very important. Now the global community might wonder that because they have been hearing a lot about China's effort or contribution on climate change at the UN climate summits. And now that we see that China is doing so little in Tibet, so people might be wondering. Now most of China's environment or climate change works emphasize on air quality, and much of their work also put on in proper Chinese area, that's coastal Chinese areas. But Chinese government has done very little when it comes to environmental issues in Tibet, in eastern Turkestan, and in Inner Mongolia. And because every time there is a environment-related activism or work, then the people who do the environment work are often labeled separated or influenced by outside people.
Yeah.
So this is very sad, because if the Chinese government allow people in Tibet to protect their own environment, own place, then people like us will not be out here. Because what we want is protection of Tibet's environment, and whoever does it is good for us. Our goal is to protect Tibet's environment so that the future of Tibet people can have a beautiful land that our elder generations had. And also people in Asia could enjoy the rivers that come from Tibet. And also the global in general can have a stable climatic condition. So this is important. Now I can tell one example is that in the recent months, as I said, that there were a lot of forest fire in eastern part of Tibet, which are incorporated into Suchen. So there were forest fire in Kanze regions, and there were forest fire in the Amdongawa regions. But the Chinese government issued one forest fire warning only on 28th March, only after things have already happened. So this shows how the Chinese government is not prepared, or they are not concerned. So this is one issue that I really put up before we go to the next question.
Thanks for that. Thanks for expanding on it. I think that the government crackdown on Tibetans, including those who are trying to raise environmental concerns, it's such a big problem, and it's something that is becoming increasingly apparent to the international community that China really is clamping down on those levels. But if we move to solutions in terms of how we can be addressing and reducing these natural disasters, what do you both see as the main ways of tackling that?
Do you like go first?
Yeah. So here, I mean, when we talk about solution, I think the first and foremost, when it comes to Tibet, and it's not only in a natural disasters, but I think in every space, Tibetan people should be included in the decision-making process in Tibet. I think right now the Chinese government's policy of top-down policy implementation is a clear indication that the Chinese policies inside Tibet is failed. That's why we see lots of massive environment protests and also self-immolations in Tibet. So over here, I would like to emphasize that the Tibetan people should be included in the decision making, and their voices should be heard. Because right now, what we see in Tibet, most of the in the higher offices, the higher authorities are the Chinese, Han Chinese, whereas at the lower positions are the Tibetans. So in that case, I think for me, I think the voices of Tibetan people should be consulted when they make any policies in Tibet by the Chinese government. And second, I think when we talk about the issue of climate change in Tibet, and then when we relate with the global climate change discussion or narrative, I think right now I feel that the Tibetan discourse, the Tibetan narrative related to the global climate change discussion or narrative is missing. So I mean, the international community should also pay more attention what is actually happening inside Tibet, even though the IPCC report has also mentioned about the grassland degradation in Tibet. But I feel that there should be more of their attention towards paid to the environment crisis in Tibet, because whatever we see in Tibet, it's especially the environment degradation. It doesn't only affect the Tibetan people, but it also affects its neighboring countries or downstream countries, where as more than 1.5 billion downstream nation people are dependent and their livelihoods are dependent on the rivers that flow from Tibet. So I think in that case, even the neighboring countries, they should pay and have a dialogue, try to have a dialogue with the Chinese government, and talk about sustainable development, economic, environment protection, and people. So voices should be heard. I think these are, for me, are very important when we talk about in terms of solution in Tibet.
Tempa, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, sure. And first I wanted, of course, a solution is ultimately what we need is solution. And I would go for any solution in Tibet, there are three parties that has to work together. But first, I would ask Tibetans, our fellow Tibetans, to adapt to the new climatic condition. And about 1,500 years ago, our kings, emperors, they started moving our homes from mountaintops into the deep valleys as Tibet got colder. Now that Tibet is getting warmer, we also need to make a drastic change in how we live.
Yeah.
Where we build our homes, how we build our homes, what we plant, what we eat. Because there is a new climate condition. We were very successful in living on the climate, on the Tibet plateau because we were constantly adapting. But now it's time we make another drastic adaptation, another drastic change. That's for us. For that, we also need to plant a lot of trees. And then, of course, the Chinese government, as I said, as Chinese government, at the moment, China's government is the occupying state, which means they are governing the governing Tibetan areas. So they have the responsibility to provide necessary technical and technical assistance and climate awareness programs. If the government officials are not aware of the issue or do not have a good understanding of climate change, they will not make decisions. They will not make decisions. If there's no decisions, there's no action on the ground. So that's important. And of course, the international community, as Dr. Lobsang directly said, there is a great understanding of Tibet's environment importance in recent years because of the work that's been done by many people in exile and also people in Tibet and also Chinese scientists and international scientists. And so there's a great understanding and great awareness. And also the UN papers have recently included Tibet nomads and Tibet's climate conditions and also natural parks. But they need to do more. Tibet need to be on the table on the climate discussion. That's very important. So this is what they need to do. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says that when it comes to environment, the Tibetan people and the Chinese government can and should work together because protection of Tibet's environment is good for everyone. That's why in 3 articles that I wrote on natural disasters, one in 2016, one in 2017, another one in 2018, I have provided ways and means to deal with the situation to the Chinese government. I have not criticized them. I have told them what they can do because ultimately Tibet's environment should be protected.
Yeah, I actually want to pick up on your point of all the work done by people inside Tibet on environmental issues. I just sort of want to jump in and say that we have had a range of questions coming in online from people. And before posing some of those to you, I just want to say that it is really encouraging to see people engaging on this issue. So please do keep the questions coming in and we'll try and get through as many of them as possible in the time that we do have left. But on the first question that's come in, someone's asked, are Tibetans in Tibet taking any actions themselves on the environment?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are a lot of people in Tibet are taking a lot of actions. They are doing a lot. And but problem is, do they have a clear understanding? Is the government providing clear understanding? And again, when Tibet, as I said earlier, and also as Lobsang directly said earlier, Tibetan people, when they are out doing something for the environment, the Chinese government somehow label them separatists because they don't like Tibetan people doing environment work. And they fear that that would, in some way or other, would be a threat to their role in Tibet. So there are a lot of Tibetans in Tibet doing great work, but then somehow the Chinese government is not supporting them.
Lobsang, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I meant when it comes to the Tibetans, I think one solution that earlier also we should focus is about the tree plantation. And in Tibet, I think Tibetan people and especially the monks and the nuns, the monasteries and many of the Tibetans are also taking initiative in terms of waste management and in terms of tree plantation, Whereas over here, the Tibet Network, we work on the case of Anya Sunda, and Anya Sunda is a Tibetan nomad, and he's also an environmental activist, but he was detained by the Chinese security in eastern Tibet in September 2018, and he has been, charged, and then we are asking for his release. Whereas there are other similar environmental activists and who takes any initiative, but what happens is that when the environment activists, they start questioning the government, then they are also put in jail, and so that also becomes quite difficult. For example, in February 7, 2018, the Tibet Public Security Department of so-called the Tibet Autonomous Region, they issued a circular and they also made clear that environment protection activities in Tibet as an illegal act. So this clearly shows that the Tibetans are specifically for the environment protection works, there are no freedom. But I feel that local Tibetans are taking initiatives, and I hope that in future there would be more of Chinese environmental NGOs coming inside Tibet and collaborate with the Tibetans and then work. And so.
Are you seeing a lot of cases of Tibetans who are protesting the environment really being cracked down on by the government?
Yeah.
So that's really insightful. I think that the focus on environmental human rights defenders is something that's increasingly gaining traction internationally as people are realizing that it's not, governments are making these acts very politicized. And I think China seems to be doing exactly the same thing when it comes to Tibetans trying to protect their environment and trying to preserve the way of life, the way that they've had it for so many generations. But I'm going to jump into the next question, which came from Facebook, and it sort of builds on some of those points that you were raising. But they've said that they've read about the Belt and Road Initiative, and they want to know, how is that affecting Tibetans inside Tibet?
For me?
For either of you, whoever feels comfortable, maybe you can start off, Lobsang, and then Tempa can jump in and sort of add some points.
Oh yeah, so when we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative and how is that impacting or affecting Tibet, I think the Chinese government's Belt and Road Initiative has become quite interesting, and people are also questioning this initiative with the recent, the COVID-19, and that is one. And so when it comes to environment, how that impacts is that they're like two different, the groups or the discourse when it comes to impact of, Belt and Road, and when it comes to the environment. Whereas there's some scholars, they say that the kind of economic development, the infrastructure development that we see in Tibet has started much before the Chinese government's introduction of Belt and Road. Whereas the other scholars, the other group of people says that with the Chinese government's introduction of Belt and Road, so there will be possibility more infrastructure development. And when we look at the Tibet Autonomous Region with the Nepal, and then there is the building of railways and roads, so that will also have a major impact on the environment as such. But I think definitely, I feel that Belt and Road has a huge impact on the environment, where they would, as I mentioned earlier also, they would emphasize more in economic development, and so there would be lack of sustainable development, and then this massive economic development will have a huge impact on environment as well as on the people.
Is there anything you want to come in on, Tempa, on that?
No, nothing much.
We had a question from Krista from ICT, and she was asking where we can learn about environmental initiatives by Tibetans inside Tibet. So would it be important to make those initiatives more known, or would that be something that's dangerous for Tibetans?
Now, there are a lot of Chinese scientists, a lot of Chinese environment activists, and also a lot of Tibetans who are working on environment issues in Tibet. And so it is safe for us not to make them too popular outside, because we need to protect their work. And so every time, whenever we raise certain issues, we have to be very careful what we are doing. We shouldn't do some things for sake of doing it. We should look more into the possible implication that would have. But again, some certain issues, again, we have to raise because people in Tibet ask or expect us to raise. And some cases where there are Tibetan environmentalists who work on environment and then they were put in jail. And in that part, we have to raise certain issues because their voice were, they were not able to raise their voice because they were under Chinese occupation. So we have to do that. So we have to be very careful, and it's complicated. It is complicated, so we have to be very careful, and we have to understand the outcome of our action. So that's important.
As a follow-up to that, we actually have a question asking, how we can internationally advocate to make the Chinese government more responsible.
You want to go first?
Yeah. So with the international advocate to talk about environment issues in Tibet, I think we have Tibet groups, and also the CTA, Central Tibetan Administration, has also taken quite a lot of initiatives, and we try to approach to the UN special, works on the environment, and then we also attend UN, climate change conferences or seminars, and then we also have tried to reach, and we have a campaign asking UN special focus, special in charge on environment to allow to visit in Tibet, and then visit the Tibetan nomads, and then see what is the ground reality. So I think there are so many campaign and so many activities going right now, both by the Tibet groups and then CTA. And so you can also visit the Tibet climate crisis, the ITN's third poll, and then we have other CTA's environment and development desk reports on environment, and then we have other Tibetan NGOs groups who also work on environment related issues. So I think you can visit on that, and then get more, and then sometimes we also have a petition. I think at the end Mandy will share more on these advocacy works.
If I can come in here. Now, outside of Tibet, we have been working rigorously on environment issues, particularly since 2009, and the environment desk of Central Tibetan Administration, or the Tibetan government in exile, in collaboration with different NGOs here in exile and in the different parts of the world. We have collectively worked on Tibet environment and have been participating at UN Climate Summit since 2009. And our previous colleagues have done great work in that work. And we also have been making a lot of effort. And what I'm very happy to share with you that the level of events that we were able to create on the globe stage about Tibet's environment importance has reached a certain point. And now everyone knows a little bit of Tibet's environment importance, and you can see everyone talking about Tibet's environment. That is the success that we have achieved. So now, since 2050, we have to move to the next stage. That is asking for more, and that is we have started put up something called 10-point call to action. What the UN and the Chinese government and the international community should or must do since 2015. And in that we have asked them to do 10-point action. since 2018, we have upgraded the level, and now we are asking the UN Climate Summit to include Tibet environment on the discussion table, which means Tibet Plateau has to be on one of the main agenda at the UN Climate Summit. That's what we are trying to push. Of course, we have not achieved that, or also we have not been able to do it as much as we really want to do, but there has been great results, and we are expecting more in the coming years, because there are a lot of Chinese scientists who are doing great work. We should appreciate that also. And there are also a lot of Chinese environment NGOs who are doing work. And of course, there are many people across the globe in the West who are doing great work on such issues, and also particularly ITN also has been doing a lot of work. And we also will be continuing to do more work, and we had great success in 2015, and then we had great success in 2019. So we are planning more in 2020, probably maybe June or July. No, I mean like 2021, sometime in June or July, when it happens in UK.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the importance of putting Tibet on the table for discussion. And Lobsang, you also mentioned Tibetan nomads and including Tibetan nomads in those discussions when it comes to the environmental impact of this climate crisis on Tibet. Someone has actually asked a question on nomads, so I'm going to pose that to you, but they sort of said a similar thing, you know, what about Tibetan nomads? You know, I understand that for many years they've been moved from the grasslands. So what does that mean for the environment? Potentially, Lobsang, you can first answer on that, and maybe Tempa, if you've got anything else after, you can come in. Sure. As well.
Sure. Right now, I mean, you know, I think since maybe we could say since 2006, the Chinese government has taken you know, quite massive policy or steps to remove the Tibetan nomads from the grassland, and then remove them from the grassland. And so when we look at this, the issue of the nomad relocation, so there are fundamentally two major reasons why the Chinese government, they introduced the nomad relocation program. And so when so over here it's also is linked with the environment degradation, whereas in Tibet we see that because of the economic development or human intervention, and then with the climate change, we see grassland degradation on the Tibetan plateau. Whereas to the Chinese government, they say that the Tibetan nomads are the reasons why we see grassland degradation on the Tibetan plateau. So the overgrazing is the major factor that is causing grassland degradation on the Tibetan plateau. So thus, they say that removal of the Tibetan nomads from the grassland or the pasture land is the solution. The second reason why the Chinese government removed the Tibetan nomad is saying that the living standard, the livelihood of the Tibetan nomad is very barbaric. It's not modern. So to be civilized, the Tibetans, you know, you can't stay in a nomadic, area. So you have to move, and then, you know, they have built a comfortable housing project where, you know, they have built houses. So in that case, when we look in this case from the environment perspective, you know, till now, you know, I don't think there has been any of the, you know, scientifically proven saying that nomads are the real causes of grassland degradation on the Tibetan plateau. Whereas the Tibetan nomads has been for thousands of years living on the Tibetan grassland, they understand how the environment works. So that is one major problem. And then when it comes to the natural disaster, I mean, we see now, you know, many of the Tibetan nomads have suffered because of the heavy snowfall, or sometimes, you know, their landslide or the pasture land mudslides that has also, you know, damaged their land as well as their livelihood as well. But once the Tibetan nomads, when we look from the human perspective and how much that nomad relocation has impact on the Tibetan nomad is also very interesting. Whereas once the Tibetan nomads are removed from the grassland, they were made to you know, live on a very housing areas where they don't have any job skills, and they don't get any employment, and so that kind of becomes the Tibetans end up becoming becoming an alien at their own homeland. So the Chinese government's policy of nomad relocation has negatively impacted both the Tibetan people as well as the environment.
Yeah, if I can add something, and yes, Lobsang has very nicely explained it, but I want to add something that the Chinese government's claim of removing the nomads out from their grassland into resettlement areas for protection of the environment had no scientific base at all, and it was proven. And later the Chinese government said, okay, they are removing Tibetan nomads to modernize them. Again, that wasn't true. And in recent years, they said they removed Tibetan nomads to improve their life, living standard. But in fact, the living standard of Tibetan nomads have only worsened. So this is very important. About half of Tibetan population live a nomadic way of life. And the Chinese government have, in the last many years, have some way or other forced Tibetan nomads out into resettlement camps. What they have done is they have enforced almost half of Tibetan population into areas where they have to live an impoverished life. So this is a tragic in many ways, and the Chinese government has to address these issues, and Tibetan nomads should be given the freedom either to live as a nomadic way of life or to move into cities. And if the condition is such that the Tibetan nomads feel that their life would be better in a city, then they will move there voluntarily, but not enforce like the Chinese government has done, and then make them their life in a very difficult situation that their life is like living in a slum. Mm-hmm. This is very sad in many ways.
I mean, the climate crisis is affecting, massively affecting nomads. It's massively affecting Tibetans inside Tibet. Obviously, the situation is not just impacting Tibet, it's impacting everyone. So on that, I'd kind of like to jump in with another question we've received, which is how the damming is affecting other countries' water supply. But just before you answer that, there's so many questions coming in, and it's really great to see such engagement on this topic, because it shows that concerns about Tibet and the environment are really becoming part of a more normalized conversation. And that's something that, Tibet movement and Tibet groups have been working tirelessly over the years to really get included. So thanks to everyone who is throwing in questions, and it's making for a really interesting discussion. So yeah, on that, I'd love to jump to the question on the effects of the damming on other countries' water supply.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about the damming, I would like to focus on Brahmaputra issue, whereas the Chinese government, has officially, built one mega dam on the Brahmaputra, whereas they have still 3 more plans to build on the Brahmaputra river, which is in Tibetan we call Gyaltsen. And whereas the Gyaltsen flows from Tibet, and then it flows in India, and then at the end at Bangladesh. But how does that impact damming on the Tibetan rivers impact on the environment? Is that, as I mentioned earlier, also the Tibetan rivers flow, and there are millions of people whose livelihood are dependent on that. So what happens is that when we talk about damming in Tibet, is that China has not signed any water treaty or water agreement with any of its neighboring countries, because since China controls Tibet, so it is the it has the power and the superpower in being at the situated at the the source of the river. So thus China has not signed any water treaty or water agreement with any of its neighboring countries. So what happens is that with regard to the damming and Brahmaputra, whereas the Chinese government, they don't share clear information, clear knowledge, or the clear data on what is actually happening on the upstream river. Whereas with India, I mean, there is also this issue has been also politicized, where what the Chinese government does is that whenever they have a border issue, they would not share the water flow data, and then they use that to bargain with the Indian government. And the second is that the mining or the damming issue has been considered very sensitive issue, and so it's very rare to see scholars, especially the Chinese environmentalists or the geologists or the hydrologists to go and study on the damming. So that's why sometimes it's very difficult to get access and to know what is actually happening at the upstream. But then when coming to with the issue of environment is that when the large scale dams are built, then the people are removed from the places. And so that also kind of caused livelihood damage to the people, because when you build a dam, you illegally forcefully remove the people from their own homeland to the other areas. That is one. And the second is that when you build a dam, when it comes to natural resources or environment, when you build a dam, you are naturally changing the river flow, the water course of the river, and that also impacts, or that creates desertification, or that also creates and impact on the ecosystems, or the animals that, and the fishes and the ecosystem that of the river system. So that also gives a bit of a negative impact on the environment as such. And so when it comes to damming on the Tibetan plateau, is that the Chinese government are building so many dams that sometimes we feel that this large number of dams are not really necessary when we look at, because on the Tibetan plateau in Tibet, and we don't have much of the population, whereas when we see the number of dams, sometimes it really concerns, and people really questions, who gets benefits of all these dams. And then when it comes to the Brahmaputra, there are certain scholars who also talks about Brahmaputra diversion, and then there will be other more dams to be built on the Brahmaputra, and that will not only have an impact on the Tibetan areas in Tibet, but will also have a negative impact in India and Bangladesh as well. So that's why the Tibetan issue, the Indian government and the Bangladesh governments, they should come together and raise voice towards the Chinese government, and then see what is actually happening, and then save the environment and save their people. And that, I think, is very important.
We have actually a question from Ellie on Facebook, where she's asking, is there a coalition lobby group for other downstream nations?
Coalition lobby group with other downstream nations, I think when it comes to, Mekong, Mekong River also flows from Tibet, and then it flows in Laos, Cambodia, the East Asian countries. But then it's like also interesting to see how there is a differences of Chinese governments, policy or their behavior when it comes with the Brahmaputra and Mekong River, because the Mekong has a Mekong River Commission, whereas in that over here, the Chinese government is not a real member, but they are I think a part of a partial member. And because I think even in Mekong River, it's also important to see that there are also smaller, the parties who influence decision making, but when it comes to Brahmaputra, there is no coalition with the Chinese or with the the Indians or the Bangladeshis, and it is also important to see why there is a differences. And till now, I feel that when it comes to the Mekong, most of this the Mekong nations which receives the Mekong River are economically, they are very, very much dependent on the Chinese government. And so they are not, collectively come together and then oppose the Chinese government as such. Whereas in Tibet, I think even with the Indian government, people also talk about, forming, coalition or the, kind of a river treaty, but then, like the Bangladeshis, they complain the Indian government for not sharing or enough information, or not sharing the or building too much of dams, whereas the Indians, they blame. So I think there is still need of more coalitions. And in that case, I think maybe I feel that if the governments are not working, maybe the civil society groups can come together and work together. And that I feel is a possible solution with this climate crisis that we see.
Yeah, collaboration or the cooperation is something that we have been really emphasizing in recent years. And we have been asking the riparian countries, through which Tibetan rivers flow. And almost all of Asian rivers originate from the Tibet Plateau and then flow into 10 most densely populated regions in Asia. So all of these regions should come together, and it should, of course, include Tibet as well. And we should form a coalition which can collectively raise certain issues with China. Yeah. And now, I'm sure many of you are aware of the fact that a recent study by Eye on Earth Incorporation has found that one of the severe drought in Southeast Asia was actually induced by some way holding back of water by Chinese government and building too many dams on the Mekong rivers. So it's clear that we really need to have cooperation. And unfortunately, a lot of organizations that have some way or other something to do with their government, and because Tibet at the moment under Chinese occupation, we have some difficulty in creating a collaboration. But I think now people must have realized that it is time we really need to work together, and Tibet need to be part of that.
Can I ask you both to give one action to people about something that they can do when it comes to Tibet crisis and raising awareness about that?
Right now, we are working on the petition regarding asking China to stop, damming in Tibet. And I think it would be nice if people can participate and then go to Tibet Climate Crisis page, the Facebook page and the Instagram page, and then sign for that petition. That would be nice. And I think that is one, I think that right now and people can take. And what about Tempa?
Yeah, we have been emphasizing on raising Tibet environment importance and urgency at the government level, and people in the freedom, people in the free land, people across the globe, people who are nature lovers should ask their government to discuss Tibet environment on a government level in their parliament. So we are ready to provide information whenever any government or any parliament asks for. So that is very important, because once we have the government level discussion, then I think it can come to the UN climate discussion. So this is what I think the international community can do. But in Tibet, people in Tibet should start planting more trees. And of course, in exile, we have to work collectively and focus on issue that protection of Tibet's environment is really important for the future of Tibet.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who has participated in this interactive session and submitted questions. There were quite a lot of questions that came in, and unfortunately we don't have a time to go through the rest of them. But as Mandy mentioned early on, these talks are part of a series. So there will be many more opportunities to ask questions regarding Tibet's climate crisis. But I also just want to thank Tempa and Lobsang for joining us for this really much needed discussion. And also just to thank you for the amazing work that you're both doing and that the Tibet movement more broadly is doing on the environment. just in terms of shedding light on what is happening inside Tibet and why conversations about Tibet and the climate crisis really need to be had, and how really any discussions about climate change that do not reference Tibet are inherently problematic. So Tibet really does need to be a focal point for any conversations that are happening on the national and international level. So with that being said, I'm going to hand back over to Mandy to make any final remarks before she closes off the session.
Thank you. Again, I'd like to echo Gloria's thanks to Lobsang and Tempa. That was a fantastic discussion, and to be honest with you, I think we could probably talk for hours more. There are so many specific issues that we could talk about, and like Gloria said, and I said at the beginning, we will be having more discussions, and you will see more of Lobsang and Tempa on those discussions as we move forward. If anyone has any specific issues that they would like us to hold one of these talks about, then please do send us a message. You can contact us via the Tibet Third Pole Facebook page. I'm now going to quickly share my screen so that you can see other ways to get hold of us. I'm hoping now that you can see the Tibet Climate Crisis website page. I can show you a number of things which are on the page. There's videos, there's information about all of the issues that have been raised today. Further, there is a take action page. So Lobsang discussed with you a number of petitions. There's one on Tibetan Nomads, there's one on damming, which Lobsang raised specifically, and there's also one on Anya Tsengdra, who's the Tibetan nomad, anti-corruption and environment activist in Tibet, who's currently in prison and waiting for his appeal to be heard. So please do visit the tibetclimatecrisis.org take action page to be able to see what you can do. I also really do urge for you to go to the Who We Are page, because one of the main things you can do, as Tempa raised, was to be doing some advocacy work with your governments. Tibet Network don't do this ourselves, because we are a network organisation working with Tibet groups around the world. But on this page, you will see a number of different groups who are actively working on the Tibet Climate Crisis campaign. And you can find your most local groups. So there's this one here is in Belgium, Australia, Brazil, the US, Germany, Canada. There are a whole host of groups that you can actively join and contact to find out what they are doing in your countries to lobby your own governments to ensure that Tibet is raised as highly as possible with your governments, particularly in the lead up to the next COP, which we do not know at the moment when it's going to be, but we're hoping it will certainly be in early 2021. But we will continue this conversation, as we say, so please do follow us on Facebook. Please do actively go to the websites and find the different actions you can take. Our next Tibet crisis called Tibet Climate Crisis talk will be next Wednesday, which will be the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And we're delighted to have Kinzum Dongadu from Australia Tibet Council and Simon Bradshaw, who is also based in Australia, and he is a climate change activist working for Oxfam Australia. And we'll have a whole host of important information to share with us. So please do join us again next week. We will be sharing some posters and information shortly. And that's it. Thank you for joining. Thank you to our panel, and we'll see you all again soon. And thanks, Gloria.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Organizations who are working on Tibet environment. I'm sure together we can definitely keep Tibet's environment beautiful and protect it for the next generation of Tibetans to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Tempa. Bye-bye.
Bye.